When two climbers began their ascent, they had no idea they would soon encounter a truly terrifying find. They had already covered about half the way up an almost vertical cliff when one of them noticed something so strange and out of place that at first he thought it was just a trick of the imagination. A small house, literally carved into the stone wall of the mountain. Curiosity proved stronger than caution, and they decided to take a closer look. But as soon as they managed to peek inside, the blood drained from their faces. It all began exactly at 10 o'clock on Monday morning. Two climbers, Daniil Orlov and Marina Lebedeva, were climbing one of the most dangerous and steepest cliffs in the country. They had just stopped to catch their breath on a small, relatively flat section of the route and were about to continue their ascent when they noticed it. Daniil leaned his back against the rough limestone wall, sweat trickling down his temples despite the short rest. Marina was a bit higher up the route. Suddenly she stopped and turned to her partner, genuine bewilderment in her eyes. "Is that a window?" she said softly, pointing ahead uncertainly. At first, Daniil thought she was just joking, but the longer Marina stared, the more his own unease grew. He squinted, leaning forward, following her hand, and then he saw it too, glass reflecting the sunlight, a window in the middle of a bare cliff. As they began to approach cautiously, the outlines became clearer. A small roof of clay tiles was built directly into the rock and hung over a wooden door that looked too real to be an illusion. Marina looked at the structure for a long time and then said quietly, "It looks like someone built a house right inside the mountain." Her voice wavered because her mind refused to accept what she saw. The house looked old, but the lines of the wood and metal parts were too neat for it all to be a random, natural formation. There was no path or ladder leading to it, only a vertical stone wall. Daniil wondered who could have dragged building materials here and how many years ago someone had stood on this very spot. Soon they noticed the only possible path, a narrow stone ledge stretching from the main rock right to the front of the house. It was no wider than a curb and hung over the void about 600 feet above the ground. Marina carefully tested the ledge with the toe of her boot. It seemed strong enough. After a brief discussion, they decided to take the risk. Faced with something so strange, it was impossible to just turn around and leave. Marina secured the safety rope and took the first step. "One at a time," she said, but Daniil insisted they go together, relying on the rope stretched between them. He stayed a little behind and moved forward, pressing his body as close as possible to the cold rock. As they progressed, the air grew noticeably colder. The wind, which had recently seemed warm, became sharp and piercing. Suddenly, a metallic clinking sound, like a bell, came from inside the house. Daniil froze, and Marina's breathing faltered. The sound was as if a shutter had slammed in the wind or someone had accidentally hit a metal object. The empty windows stared at them, showing no signs of life. "We've come too far to turn back," Marina said tensely but resolutely. "We need to understand what's inside." Daniil hesitated, glancing down into the abyss, then reached out and felt Marina's firm grip. Together they stepped from the ledge onto a small area right in front of the door of the mysterious house. The door was massive, and the wood was surprisingly smooth for its age. Daniil touched the handle and was surprised. It was almost warm. There were no signs of decay or destruction, despite the obvious antiquity of the building. Marina put her ear to the door, trying to catch any sound, but there was a frightening silence inside. The interior of the house was plunged into darkness, and Daniil turned on his headlamp, directing the beam deep inside. Marina covered her mouth with a scarf, her eyes widening with a mixture of fear and excitement. They ducked to pass under the low opening. The door was barely wider than one person. And then they noticed a strange thing. The facade of the house did not correspond at all to what was behind the door. Inside there was no room, no furniture, only a narrow tunnel going deep into the mountain. The tunnel was only slightly wider than the doorway, and the windows they had seen from the outside were completely absent inside. "So, the glass is just set into the stone," Daniil said distractedly. But where did this tunnel lead? There was no answer. They took a few steps forward, and suddenly the sound rang out again, a sharp clink, followed by a metallic thud. The same bell, but now much closer, and the sound seemed to come from somewhere ahead. Daniil and Marina slowly moved on. The tunnel stretched for about 60 feet and was relatively easy to pass. But then something unexpected happened. Outside, the wind raged, and suddenly a particularly strong gust hit the front door. The fragile-looking wooden door slammed shut and jammed in the doorway. A dull thud echoed off the stone walls. They rushed back, pulled the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Daniil tried to push the door with his shoulder, but to no avail. When the flashlight beam illuminated the edges of the door, it became clear how deeply it was stuck in the frame. The exit was blocked, and the wind outside only increased the pressure. They were trapped inside a strange mountain structure. Realizing there was no way out, they were forced to go further, toward a faint light source ahead. At the end of the narrow passage, the tunnel suddenly widened and led them into a small room, more like the living room they had expected to see from the very beginning. The room was carved right into the rock and resembled a crude underground barrack. A thick layer of dust covered all surfaces, softening the corners of a roughly made table. Several chairs and low wooden bunks stood against the wall. "What is this place? Who lives here?" Marina whispered. On the table was a plate with food remains. Next to it was a mug with a dark coating on the bottom and a torch that was still barely smoldering. Someone obviously lived here, and that made it even more unsettling. Above the bunks on the stone wall hung faded photographs showing mountain peaks and groups of climbers. In all the photos, the faces were crudely crossed out, except for one. "Is he the one living here?" Marina whispered, pointing to a man in a blue hat. The crossed-out ovals around him looked malicious and caused great unease. If this person was nearby, the thought of it was not at all comforting. The silence was heavy, and Marina shivered as if someone were watching them. Every shadow seemed to move. Daniil quietly called her, and only a moment later she replied, trying to get her breathing under control. Suddenly, muffled footsteps were heard from above, as if someone were walking right over them. They froze and stared at the ceiling. There was no second floor, no attic, nothing that could explain this sound. It seemed as if someone was moving inside the rock mass itself. Using the table as support, Daniil reached for a small hatch and pulled it down. With a loud creak, it opened, releasing a stream of cold air and revealing a dark passage. "Are we really going in there?" Marina asked, but Daniil was determined. "If we're being watched, it's better to find out who it is." He went up first and soon returned, saying quietly, "You won't believe what's there." Marina, hesitating, took his hand, and the table wobbled slightly as he helped her up. She found herself in a narrow corridor going deep into the mountain. They heard the sound of dripping water, which grew louder as they progressed until it turned into a deafening roar. At the wooden door at the end of the corridor, they grabbed the handle and pulled. They were immediately hit by the roar of water, and they found themselves behind a huge waterfall. Light strangely penetrated into the cave, reflecting off the spray. "How is this possible?" Marina breathed. And then a voice echoed, calling them by name. At a small pond below stood a man and waved. It was the man from the photos, the one in the blue hat. Daniil became wary, but Marina insisted there was no way back. The man looked calm and pointed to steps carved into the stone. "They are reliable, I checked," he said. They descended and approached him. "My name is Alexei," the man said. "I am a climber, like you." He said that 7 years ago he came here with a group of 6 people, but the ropes broke, and he was left here alone. The others went for help and never returned. At first he was angry and crossed out their faces in the photos. The facade of the house was here before he arrived, and he never found out who built it. There was water, shelter, and food here. Rescuers later found him, but he refused to leave because he had found peace here. Asked about the exit, he pointed to a narrow spiral path along the waterfall. Daniil and Marina smiled with relief. They ate fish and wild greens together with Alexei, cooked over a small fire. Before leaving, they promised to keep the secret of this place. When they finally stepped out into the fading evening light, they realized they had become part of a strange mystery they would remember for the rest of their lives. Friends, share in the comments. What do you think of this story? If the video was interesting, support us with a like and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.